Welcome to ACI, the Network Made Simple learning series. In this video, we will cover
Module 3.1 Configuring Logical Connectivity in the Cloud, Chapter 5 From Zero to Networking in Azure using Cloud ACI. In the previous chapters, we talked about Cloud ACI and how it can help organizations integrating or migrating to the cloud faster. Let's now learn how to deploy and configure Cloud ACI on Azure starting from zero. Our scenario for today is simple. We want to connect a web server VM to a database VM running on Azure and only allowing ICMP and HTTP traffic between them. I will also need to provide internet access to my web server VM, since I will want to connect to it via SSH directly from my laptop. Are you ready? Let's get started then. We will take three main steps to achieve our goal using Cloud ACI on Azure. 1. We will subscribe to the Cloud APIC service. 2. We will run the initial setup wizard. And 3. We will configure the logical network just as we know it already. I will take you through all these steps to achieve connectivity. But before we get started with the configuration, there are some prerequisites we need to follow. We will need at least 2 resources groups, which will belong to the same Azure subscription or belong to different subscriptions. In today's video, we will use a single subscription model. However, keep in mind that additional steps and permissions may be needed with using multiple subscriptions. The first resource group will be used as our infra tenant in Cloud APIC. Unlike AWS, Azure has a default of 10 public IP addresses. Therefore, we don't need to request for additional ones. However, the default virtual CPU limits may need to be increased. This is because CSR uses multiple D-Series VM based on the bandwidth you choose, and APIC uses the D-Series V3 with at least 8 virtual CPUs to deploy. You can easily check if your current quota meets the requirements by going into your Azure portal, clicking on your subscription, then Usage plus Quotas. If you search for your regional virtual CPUs in the region you will deploy your Cloud ACI services, you will see the current values. So, just request a limit increase to accommodate your needs. Provide a description for your request and click Submit. A few minutes after, you will get an email with your case ID and someone will contact you to increase your regional virtual CPUs. Then, you can confirm this by refreshing your console, which should display the request value. Now, in order for Cloud ACI to perform its automation capability on Azure, we will need to make sure we are registered to these 4 resource providers to enable monitoring, logging, and messaging. You can verify or enable your registration to them by click on All Services on the left menu, then Subscriptions, and once in your subscription, click on Resource Provider. If you see any of these 4 services with a non-registered status, just register them and you should be set. Last, CSR 1000B is always used in Cloud ACI on Azure, regardless of using Hub and Spoke through PNG and CSR or VNet peering. You will need to subscribe to the CSR 1000B service in order for Cloud APIC to automatically deploy it. Just go to the Azure Marketplace and search for Cisco Cloud CSR, selecting the Bring Your Own license model for the right version based on your Cloud ACI deployment. In our case, we will be deploying Cloud APIC version 5.1. Therefore, we will choose XE 17.3. But as new versions become available, it is always good to check the corresponding CSR 1000B version in the Cloud APIC installation guide to make sure you have the right one. Then, instead of clicking Create, click on Get Started in the Deploy Programmatically option. This is done so that the Cloud APIC can automate its deployment through the Setup Wizard. Then, enable it from your subscription and click Save. Remember that each tenant you create in Cloud ACI on Azure will result in the automate creation of a new resource group, either sharing the same Azure subscription as the infra tenant or in a different one. Once we have all the prerequisites met, let's subscribe to the Cloud ACI service. Remember that Cloud APIC will run as an Azure VM on Azure. In order to accomplish this, we will do 3 simple steps. 1. we will subscribe to the service in the marketplace. 2. We will adjust the Cloud APIC settings. And 3. We will let the Automate Azure Resource Manager template do the rest. Let's start with 1 then. Go to the marketplace and search for Cisco APIC, and click on Create. The Azure Resource Manager template is automatically loaded, as you can see. Let's adjust the basic settings. We will first need to create a resource group for our infra tenant, and select the region where we want this Cloud APIC to run on. In my case, I will choose UK South. I will then add a password, and we will also need to create an SSH public key. I can do that directly on my laptop. In my case, I am using a Mac with Linux. So all I need to do is run the command ssh-keygen, and then copy its value and paste it in the corresponding section. Done. Now, let's click on Next ACI setting. First, add a name to the deployment. It can be anything. Then, you may leave the default or just adjust. I will modify the default infra-subnet value so that it doesn't overlap with on-prem VTEP pools or other Cloud APIC infra pools such as the one we did in AWS. Then, in the external subnet section, provide the network where you want this APIC to be accessible from. I will add 0.0.0.0-0 to allow access from anywhere. Click Review and Create. Azure Resource Manager will run a validation and let you know if there is anything you need to correct. It seems we are good to go. Let's click on Create then. You will see multiple resources automatically created by the Cloud APIC template, as we covered before. Once the status changes to Create Complete, go into your resource group and click on your Cloud APIC VM. You can now copy the public IP from it and paste it on your browser using HTTPS to have access. We are done. Cloud APIC is now running and all its necessary cloud constructs were automatically created. If you go into the Azure portal in your resource group, you can see in the virtual network section that the VNet called Overlay1 was created, including your defined infra IP addresses space and network interface. A few subnets were also created, and the corresponding application and network security groups allowing SSH, HTTPS, and ICMP inbound were created as well. After APIC is up and running, let's now log in and run the initial configuration wizard with 3 simple steps. 1. We will set the DNS and NTP server. 2. We will select the Azure region or regions we want this Cloud APIC to manage. 3. And finally, we will add the corresponding license if we have them. Otherwise, we will leave the trial version running. Let's start by logging into our Cloud APIC with our defined credentials. And in the welcome screen, click on Begin First Time Setup. Click on DNS and NTP server and adjust your parameters as needed. Then, let's now go to the region management section. But before we choose our region, let's first cover a few concepts applicable to region management and how ACI implements it. As we mentioned before, we will choose which connectivity method we want for inter-VNet traffic, whether CSR and BNG or VNet peering. Both methods follow a hub and spoke model. However, VNet peering is the preferred one, since it provides higher throughput. This model requires a Network Virtual Appliance, or NVA, to perform spoke-to-spoke routing, and that is why a pair of CSR 1000B routers are automatically deployed in the infra resource group, along with an Azure network load balance to connect both performing load balancing and failover. This means that the different spoke tenants with their VRS or VNets will peer against the infra tenant VNet and will use the network load balance VIP, representing both CSR as net hub to communicate to other tenants. This process will be fully automated, and routers will also be automatically programmed to each tenant VNet using user-defined routing. You may choose to deploy multiple hubs with CSRs in multiple locations if you would like for proximity purpose. Now, if you choose to run CSR 1000Bs and VNGs instead, Cloud ACI will automate the deployment of at least 2 CSRs in a specific region. All the different tenant resource groups will communicate with the CSR hub through an automatically provisioned virtual network gateway or VNG. ACI will take care of all the necessary IPsec tunnel setup and routes between CSRs and VNGs. If you decide to run CSR 1000B in one location only and you have tenants in different locations, keep in mind that inter-VNet traffic in a given region may have to travel all the way to the hub region. Therefore, although optional, it is recommended that you consider the deployment of additional CSR pairs wherever needed to optimize traffic forwarding. Now that we know them, let's go back to Cloud APIC. In this case, we are using VNet peering as our default inter-VNet connectivity model, and there are 2 boxes we can check. The first one should be enabled if we want to deploy CSR 1000Vs in a specific region. The second one if we are planning to interconnect to other clouds or on-prem environments through them. From here, we can choose additional regions to manage, and you may enable any of the previous covered checkboxes as well. In our case, our Cloud APIC is deployed in the UK South region, so I will select it and click Next. Here, as you can see now, we already have a subnet pool for our CSR cloud routers in the UK South region. This value came from our deployment settings and will be used to assign internal IPs to CSR's interface, as we explained before. We will use Azure Network Load Balancer, so we need to add another subnet. If we want to enable additional hub regions with CSR, keep in mind that you will need one separate subnet per additional region. Now, I will assign a BGP autonomous system to the CSR, as well with a username, which must not be admin, so in this case I will use Cisco. Then, assign the password and the desired throughput. Remember that if you choose a higher throughput, Cloud APIC will automate a large D-Series VM for CSR, which may increase your overall cost. If you have a licensed tokens, place it here. Otherwise, we will go with the trial. Finally, you have the option to edit your cloud resources naming convention if you want. In this case, I will leave the default values, click Save and Continue. If you have your Cloud APIC license, you may choose to include them as well. Otherwise, just run with the grace period for now, and you should be done. Remember that you only have 90 days grace periods for the CSR and Cloud APIC. If you go to the infrastructure section in the Cloud ACI portal and click on Inter-Region Connectivity, you should see that Cloud APIC will start deploying CSRs and the deployment status. Once finished, we can go back to the Azure portal, where we can see that there were multiple objects automatically deployed in our inference subscription. We can see routing tables and an Azure Network Load Balancer as we explained before. It's now time for us to configure the logical network just as we learned. Therefore, join me in part 2 of this video, where we will create a few VMs and simply connect them through Cloud ACI.